right, OKRs. We call it outcomes and key results. Some of you may have heard of it as objectives and key results. In the chat, how many of you are doing OKRs today? And you can either answer in the chat or you can do a thumbs up on your attendee list. A lot of thumbs up there. All right. How many of you feel you're doing them the right way? You see a thumbs up for that. Thumbs down if no. One's doing a thumbs up. All right, in the middle there. Got 2 thumbs up. Marie, is that a no or a so-so?
It's a maybe.
A maybe? Yeah. What
That's a wonky face, I would
yeah.
say. Yeah.
Tell me a bit about the maybe.
I think there are some that I think we spend a lot of time and do well, and there are some that I think the thing I struggle with is how to effectively measure.
Good.
Very good.
At the corporate level, at a team level, both?
Both.
Well, we will get into a few different techniques and approaches to help measure it, but you've kind of jumped ahead to one of the big challenges, which is the right ones to measure, typically the hardest, and that's why people tend to make the mistakes on that. Yeah, struggle with how to measure. All right. So the agenda today will cover why do we care about OKRs, what they are. We'll walk through the John Doerr football example, the grading exercise, and we'll spend quite a bit of time on different examples. Some of this will be fairly small font text, so you'll want to download these later, and we'll spend a little bit of time on those. We'll show you something called DuPont diagrams, which help you create OKRs, some common mistakes, and then we'll close out with the V model, and we'll explain what that is, how that ties to OKRs. So why do we care? These are some older stats pre-COVID, and they're still about the same today. A common thing that we hear is employees are just not feeling engaged at work. And with COVID, we've all have tried to overcome that, but it's still a very high number of people not feeling engaged. And there's a lot of lost productivity and a lot of lost turnover when employees are not engaged in the company. Dale Carnegie, famous business prognosticator and influencer, he said one of the largest drivers of senior leadership's ability to lead the company is to communicate its goals. The more that you can have employees understand every day how they impact the bottom line, typically from a customer perspective, or the success to shareholders, the more engaged people are when they can see what they're doing influences outcomes. So the background, they were invented at Intel in the 1970s. They really became popular at Google around 1999. And we use the term outcomes more so than objectives, meaning outcomes are how do I envision what's going to happen in the future? So, and they have to be meaningful. The key results define the roadmap. They help influence it to realize each objective. And one of the key concepts I want you to think about is the key results are the independent variables, things that you can control, and the objective is the dependent variable. Another way of saying that is lagging versus leading indicators. So the key result would be a leading indicator and the outcome would be the lagging indicator. And those are typically easier to measure, the lagging indicators versus the leading ones, which are telling you if you're on the right track. So from a cascading, just the simplest level, at the top level, you'll have an objective and a key result. From those, you have plans and initiatives that are typically on your roadmap. If you are in the software delivery, it's probably in Jira in your backlog in the form of epics. If you are doing waterfall or other parts of the business, these may only be managed in emails, PowerPoints, Excel, and they're not easily managed or tracked in other parts of the business because most parts of the business just don't have the tools to measure these things the way that engineering teams do. So what is to be measured? The dependent variable. These need to be significant to the company. They should be supported by the entire organization, and they should be measurable and aggressive. And we'll give you some examples there of what that means. So many of you have probably heard the term SMART, and specific, measurable, achievable, but aggressive. You have to push yourself. They're clear results based and they're time bound, usually within a quarter or a year. And we want you to limit it to 3 to 4. We say up to 8, and the larger the company, the more you tend to see. Those may be needed just for certain departments, but any particular team can really only focus on 2 or 3 things. Ideally, down at the lowest level, the team level, they're only focused on 1 or 2 of these. So we see this a lot. We just had a client last month, where at the top level, they were not specific, they were not measurable. There was their second iteration, and they didn't get down into any details until lower levels of the company. But this was a 40-year-old company, and it was a big initiative just to introduce OKRs. They had gone through a whole exercise of different frameworks before, so it takes a while to adopt OKRs. All right. It creates a discipline of planning. That's one of the reasons of why we do it. And a lot of folks underestimate the time it takes to create good OKRs. It's also measuring progress. So you're trying to find these indicators to make sure that you're aligned. And you do want some flexibility in there because you will correct course. And if you do have some lower level, more shorter time-based outcomes, it gives the team confidence that they're moving forward, that you can see that you're actually likely to improve those outcomes. So that's the idea of the team. It gets inspired confidence. If you have something that ends at the very end of the year, then, and you're not measuring until then, it's typically very disappointing exercise to see that. We even found this trap ourselves. We did our OKRs last year, and we realized around September we were completely missing on one key indicator for about 6 months, and we had to pick it back up and improve there. So it happens to all of us, though. So even though we teach this, we're not always haven't been the best at doing this ourselves. So we're refocused on this. We just had our OKR exercise yesterday, and we won't share those with you, but it's very good to see. And the more that you can get those owned by individuals, it's better. And that was one of our mistakes. We just had one person on the OKRs versus each person understanding their input to it. So
It takes time. It takes iterations. The process is exceedingly beneficial, but allow for the refinement as you continue to go through it, as you exercise it for 3 to 6 months to understand and adjust how you want those to look for your company.
The second thing we'd like you to take away from what Doug said, which is it takes a while, is it's ultimately the results. And they have to be measurable business or customer results. Those are the only things that matter. Nothing else really matters. It's not how smart the team is, how many projects you delivered, how many hours you worked. Those are potentially inputs, but they're not really leading to outcomes. And those are also potentially outputs of what you've decided to do. But unless they're focused on business results, they really don't count in OKRs or really to your business or to your shareholders. We'll walk you through a brief history of some of the other frameworks and where some of the confusion comes from. MBOs, those are measurements by objectives, and that was popularized in the 50s. OKRs, and we'll also talk about KPIs. So just some terminology here. MBOs, measurement by objectives, go all the way back to the 50s. We still see this today. The champion there was Peter Drucker. The goal was you have to achieve 100% of an MBO. Compared to an OKR, we're typically focused on trying to get to 60 to 70%. You can't expect to achieve everything. MBOs were also individually based. So it was to measure a CEO, a direct report, all the way down to individuals. And it was really typically annual. And the primary focus for MBOs was for compensation. And it would go all the way down from the manager down to the lowest level of an employee. OKRs, though, are the focus at the organization, not the individual. And the frequency is typically monthly, sometimes quarterly, and even annually at the very end. But monthly is sometimes needed to make sure you're on track, because every 3 months may be too long. The purpose is really efficiency and alignment. The depth, though, is that it does not go down to the individual. It only goes down to a team. And that's a key distinction there where we see folks miss that up. KPIs, those are just key performance indicators. They've been around forever. Anyone can use them. The goal is just to measure it. It's a metric, and it could be just any part that's run the business or any part of the department to just make sure they're continually improving internally, though. And you can go any point, not just down to a person level, but you're going to take it all the way down even to the machine level in a lot of cases. All right, so just from a graphical view, go ahead, Doug.
If I could add, yeah, on OKRs, if you go back one slide, it goes down to the team level. That doesn't mean that an individual doesn't have an input to it. The projects, the tasks, the things that people do each day are focused towards the achievement of the key results and the objectives or the outcomes. So they're tied intricately together, but you don't build an OKR that goes all the way down to the individual level.
Very good. So just looking at that graphically on one axis here, the focus from the individual level up to the organization level versus the frequency, annual versus monthly. MBOs are down in this bottom left quadrant. KPIs can exist in any of these quadrants. OKRs are at the organization level and can be annually down to monthly from a frequency perspective. So just a simpler view of that previous slide. All right. We're going to walk you through the example for American football. This is how John Doerr explains it in his book. And for those of you that don't know American football, there's some similar concepts for other ones. But notice it's American football, the team concept we explained before, 11 players on the field at one time, but they're separate teams. So at a high level, we're using the concept of a general manager, and this is a professional football league. You're starting to see this in the college level as it's become more professionalized, and even some of the top high schools are this way too. So the general manager, they have, for example, two outcomes. Their main outcome is to make money for the owners. And those key results are win the Super Bowl and fill the stands to 80% because they're somewhat related. Those get delegated down, though, to the head coach. So the head coach is responsible for winning. Fill the stands is a public relations or marketing or a sales function there. Those in turn have subordinate key results. So for the head coach, the example is, okay, on offense, we want 200 yards a game. For a passing attack, we want to have the third ranked defense and a 25-yard punt return average. Where PR, they could have three subordinate key results to get the stands to 88%. Their hypothesis is, hey, we should try to hire either drafting or through free agency 3 colorful players. Try to get on 2 Monday night games because there's no competition. You get a nationwide audience. And then also to highlight key players in press releases. So those are the subordinate outcomes. So looking down one more level here, we're just going to do the left side of this tree here, where for offense, and you have a whole team that just focus on offense, their outcome is to get the 200 yards a game passing attack. And to get there, they have to complete 75% of their passes. Same thing with the defense. They want to be at least in the top 3. To get in the top 3, they believe they need to hold opponents to less than 100 yards a game. And then for special teams, they want to average 25-yard punt return. To get to that over the course of the year, they think they need 3 blocked returns. 3 blocked punts will really cut that number in half. So you can start to see how this cascades down. And you do have leaders at the top that are driving particular higher level key results, but teams own them at the lower level. So in this example here, you wouldn't go below the offense level here. This is the lowest level you would see in your OKR tree. And so this actually has 3 levels. The top one, which is making money, that's the general manager. You have the head coach, and then offense and special teams. So let me pause there for questions. Any questions on this example here? And we occasionally get some for folks that know football well, American football. All right.
Christopher, as you work down the team hierarchy, does the outcome have to mirror the key result from the outcome above?
Ideally, it should, or be a portion of that. And we'll give you some examples of that, of how does it contribute to the one above. It shouldn't be orphaned on its own. And we'll show you some examples also where some lower level key results can drive potentially 2 higher level ones. And that's an important exercise that teams have to go through, is the alignment exercise. It doesn't always start at the top down. You typically like to see OKR start at the top, but you need teams building them from the bottoms up also to see what's realistic. They're closer to these intermediate goals. And the alignment exercise is used to make sure, where are there cross-team dependencies? Where do these make sense? So it is a combination of top down and bottoms up and an alignment to get those aligned. Because a lot of times you'll see from either the top down, the bottoms up, they're misaligned, and that leads to teams just wasting effort for things that really don't move the bottom line. So does that help answer your question, Christopher, or do you have a more specific one that you'd like us to drill into? Good.
He's good.
All right. So grading the OKRs and this example here, remember we mentioned that you do not expect to get 100% of all of these. And so in this example here, a particular team, they met their goal for 200 yards. They actually exceeded this goal. So they gave themselves 100%. You can't get bonus points, but they got 100% of that goal. For defense, they came in 9th. So they gave themselves a 70% goal. At the time of this, there were 20 plus teams though. So that still put them at higher than average and a better than average defense, but they did not get in the top 3. And then lastly, on punt return average, they were only able to provide a 10-yard average. And so they failed that one at only 40%. So we marked that as red. Overall, they got 70% of their goal. They did not win the Super Bowl in this example, but they did make money and they did improve their outcomes though. So that's the idea of the measurement part of actually measuring your progress against those OKRs. And as you do this at scale, you really need tools to do this. It's really difficult to do this in Excel or PowerPoint. So just want everyone to see that the key point here is you're not supposed to get to 100%. If you do get to 100%, that means your goals are too easy and you haven't really
common,
stretched
too
the
easy.
team. Yeah.
That's a significant point. How does it feel to be successful at 60 to 70%? Good, bad, normal, odd, weird?
It should be realistic. So that's the goal. So just reviewing this top level, this is a very simple example of increasing profits. That's the outcome or objective you want to have. The way to increase profits, and this is just simple from our accounting one before. One is increase revenue. Another one is decrease your cost of goods sold. And all the way down to, in this example, this is showing a fictional 8th one, decrease your operational costs. So this is fairly easy to see at the top level, but different teams can own different subordinate ones. And in this example here, you could even have subordinate lower level teams be supporting multiple key results. The sales team could, for example, they could be driving the revenue. Product team has a contribution to that, but they also may have a high cost of operational costs of a lot of salespeople, a lot of marketing expenses. So they might, in a lot of cases, will own or support multiple key results that cascade down. So we have some references for this. This is from our Art of Scalability book where we can read more about that, but we're going to walk you through some very specific examples. This first one is this is a fictional one that we've done for a multinational e-commerce company, okay? And in this case, it's multiple countries within Europe is the example here. We'll leave this here as some notes for you to understand this, but there's 2 examples we're going to visualize. And remember some of the key things here are focused on outcomes, not outputs. You typically want to have them written as you want to change some metric from X to Y. If you don't have a metric in there and from and a to, you typically are missing that. And be careful with percentage change. It's better to have final outcomes or outputs on those. Both versions we're going to show you are hypothesis driven. And you will see when you write these, a lot of times lower level ones do look like outputs. We talked about this before. We want to show you this cascading effect here and why you need to have alignment across teams. In this example here, we're showing you a mix of top down and bottom up, but ultimately one owner per outcome, one owner per KPI, they go down and it goes only down to the team level, not the individual contributor level here. So this example, the goal is to grow market share by 2%. This gets cascaded down to the general manager of Europe in this example. And in this particular one, at the top level, one of the key results was extending a current capability. In this example, it was pay and ship with a 20% adoption. So this was a feature they had launched before, but the idea was there wasn't much awareness of it, and they wanted to extend this capability. So that cascaded down to, one is just increasing awareness of the function in there. Also, the measuring, they want to make sure that 50% of the user base had been using it. And they've also reduced support escalations, which means they've tried to fix some quality ones. So that's just a way of visualizing a top level goal related to a feature, but really ultimately having an outcome that impacts market share. Okay, so there's the logic there between market share all the way down to feature adoption in this case, and it's not assumed; it's explicitly stated in these OKRs. In this particular one, it shows how those were cascaded down to a sales and marketing function, that team, a product and engineering team, and a customer support team. And again, these are all fictional ones. The sales and marketing ones are about campaigns and awareness with multiple touch points. And that was their outcome. I think if we hit this particular user with 3 messages, they're more likely to be aware of and use that. They had partners, and so there was a channel avenue here, but also a new campaign for new prospects that were not already existing prospects. Product engineering, identifying what were the blockers of usage within it, reducing friction in the usage of it, and then do some A/B testing for any changes in it. Customer support, they're looking at it for what are the customers saying, what are those root causes, reduce level 1 escalations and reducing level 2 escalations. So you can see how these cascaded down to lower level teams here. And then in this specific example, when you have multiple countries that all contribute up to a top level, this is another example here, really focused on marketing, 2 different marketing ones and a business development one where they were building out the channel. So looking at it at a tree level, and again, this is dense, but this is one of the takeaways we want to have you have is that you really need to visualize your trees at this level to see how they all link. And this is difficult to do in PowerPoint. When you're bouncing back and forth, you typically need a larger tool to visualize how these things relate to one another to make sure they make sense. And when you have a tree view like this, it's much easier to do that alignment exercise where you can just look at a very large, imagine this is a large canvas where you can see, hey, these bottom level ones don't quite relate to middle ones, or from any of the top ones, maybe we're missing a big one at the top level, which is common also. So again, just a fictional example, but the point is just to see how this is cascaded down within a fairly large company down at least 4 levels here in this case. Question for the audience. How many of you go down below 2 levels today? I'm hearing no one has below 2 levels. I'm gonna call out Marie here. So Marie, from the example you've seen here, what are some of the, good job, Christopher. Yeah, you're not big enough to go down below 2 levels. Marie, is your company big enough to go down below 2 levels?
I think in theory, yes. My organization right now is just going through a lot of changes, so we're not quite as organized as we need to be able to go below 2 levels, but we hopefully will get there. We're trying to re-platform, so we're just rebuilding from the ground up right now, so we're not quite doing it, but in theory, we will.
Yeah. How many of you are just driving this within product and engineering and you don't have buy-in from the CEO or head of sales? Are any of you running into that challenge?
Hey, Phil, it's Chris. Do you mind if I talk as opposed to typing
bet.
stuff?
Sure.
You bet.
So I don't know if it's like we do the exercise, but like the struggle I find with, because I'm like a big proponent of it and proposed this methodology for our company, is that it just is not like fall. Like there's always something else that's popping up or sidetracking. So it's like we have these high level objectives for the year, but for the most part, they just become dismissed, as opposed to me, where I'm managing the technology aspect of the company. I try to be disciplined and adhere to it each quarter. Like, so we'll do like annual and then quarterly ones. Trying to keep doing the quarterly ones and doing it, but it's hard to keep everyone motivating when like at the high level, it's just not, it's kind of like out of sight, out of mind for, to the other leaderships here. So I don't know, like I run into that struggle. But everyone agrees that we need to have goal setting.
It's very hard, if you don't have buy-in at the CEO level. It will only go so far, and it will take multiple cycles for the CEO and head of sales to really to change behaviors, because they've probably come in from another management framework that's either different or doesn't have that longer term horizon. So the goal here is managing multiple time horizons of the short term, the middle term, and the long term. And it may be helpful to dig into what kind of frameworks they have. We have a slide at the very end we'll show you of they may be coming at it from a different mindset versus or a different framework that's slightly different, but they should align to OKRs. So it's a big sales effort to persuade the higher ups in the company to do it. And if you really need to have product engineering partnering together to even have a chance of influencing the CEO, it really does take a lot of influence for just one direct report to the CEO to drive these kind of behaviors until you can really tie it to revenue goals. That's hard typically for technology to tie that to revenue goals unless they can show particular contributions. So definitely understandable, and we can follow up later for some other approaches or techniques how to influence the CEO. Usually they're best influenced by their peers. It's hard to influence from the bottoms up in many cases, and we'll show you some approaches there. All right. This third example, just a slight different variation, but it can help you guys with some examples here. All right. So this, what we'll get into now is how to do some specific measurements and different approaches there to write better OKRs and to identify the tree structure here. So one example here, a very common one is an e-commerce funnel. And these are traditional KPIs for, you have a home page and it doesn't even show, for example, the one above this, which is, for example, Google searches driving traffic to your site. Nowadays, it could be other searches coming from the Gemini version or from ChatGPT or Perplexity, but there will be different ways that drive traffic to your site. And some examples here are some KPIs that can just improve the funnel from getting people from a home page or getting people directly to a specific product page or a search page. And so you're going to have different KPIs. In this case, they're probably owned by one team. Some cases, we see a lot of companies where these are owned by multiple teams. So product is typically owned by a product team. If you're selling physical goods, they're enriching the product details to make it easier to search. They're enriching the details to make it easier to relate to the end buyer for their job to be done. Search is going to be optimized by potentially a different team to have screaming fast search. Shopping cart has its own experience. There's a lot of friction in the funnel there. Checkout, there can be friction there. You may not provide enough payment options. And then the whole return experience. So anywhere in this funnel here, you can lose customers. So these are just some specific examples for a particular funnel here. And OKRs are very helpful if they can reflect a real business model. If in this case, this is a funnel-shaped business model. In other cases, you may have an hourglass where the very bottom of the funnel is referrals, cross sales, upsells, renewals. So you might see a visualization of an hourglass view of this instead.
Philip, we have a question.
Yeah, I see a question. Yeah.
Is there a possible tool that could help provide software engineering intelligence data to help drive building the business model?
There are tools, and we're going to show you a technique to do that. And we'll be jumping ahead here, but initially you're going to want to model this in Excel yourselves. So in this example here, this is PowerPoint. We're going to show you an example how to convert this drawing here into initially an Excel model so you can model this out though. But it's easier to model there.
He said,
Excel.
boo, Excel.
Yeah.
Excel is the wonder tool. It's the Swiss Army knife, buddy.
Yep.
You may not like it.
So in this example here, this is a very visual one here of an engineering team for a bank. And again, all fictional. So one is just a 1% increase in profitability. And then another one is improving customer satisfaction scores. And then at the left side, measured by cash flow. So on the left side, you can see higher developer throughput, lower cost of goods absolute for the site. In this case, it's a banking site. And then 2% improvement just from being more efficient in what you can do every year. Another one on the right side, improving customer satisfaction, is just having availability. So this is a place to measure availability. which we're going to talk about next week, how to measure this though. But customers do care about availability. Response times. So this is a big one we expect to see in not just e-commerce, but most websites, less than 2-second response times. Otherwise you get high bounce rates. And the number is kind of staggering. When you get to 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5 seconds, the bounce rate just skyrockets. So just having a screaming fast site can really improve conversions. And then of course, no security risks, because that's a very high impact if something bad happens there.
Reginald asked, is availability in this context the same as uptime?
Yes, and we'll measure uptime is here. Most of the discussions we'll cover in the next 2 sessions. We're going to use uptime, but there are other measurements of availability where it's not just time, but particular time windows are even more important than other time windows. So eventually you want to get not just time, but you want to translate into dollars and customer dollars ultimately. But
understand the criticality, the criticality of uptime, and it has a time factor to it.
Yep.
So what we're asking you to do is come back to our, keep coming. We'll hit that in very, very significant detail as we go.
And this is another example here of just showing how a lower level subordinate key result could be owned by product, software engineering, infrastructure folks, and information security. In our last one, we talked about team design. A lot of these folks should be on the same team. And so it's helpful if those folks that have those skill sets still understand the big picture, though, even though they may be a subordinate level at a lower level team. So just keep that in mind. This is another one example. So these are just more examples of key results for you to see that could contribute. So for example, you want to increase developer throughput as measured by velocity, and you have, for example, 5 key results. These are the leading indicators that you hypothesize will improve your ability to improve your output. So reduction in rework, reduction in idle time, reduction in meeting times, ramp up time, reduction in bugs. We like to see these when you move to Agile, or if you're trying to improve your Agile processes. These are common ones because one of the key focuses of Agile is leaning out your processes to improve velocity. Product examples here. This is very specific to outcomes. And then lastly, reducing cost. You can see how, for example, lowering cost of goods sold by having auto scaling in there, or just automation. You're not spending time building out environments. You can see how they all contribute in this example here. More examples here, and you'll want to download this in the PDF so you can kind of see how they relate and how some of them change based on the different examples here. So again, just examples to help you see how you want to improve some potential key results there. All right. So one of the questions that you asked was, is there a tool? One of the approaches that we recommend is called a DuPont diagram. And notice how in the DuPont diagram here, you're trying to just strip this down to the math of how do you make money? How do you lose customers? How do you make a profit here? So you're simplifying all that language here, but you can kind of see how all these things relate. So the funnel could be an example, is one example. This one here is used for an auction site. A lot of us at AKF used to work at eBay, so this is a fictional example that we had used. Really showing how does the company make money or not, because in this case it was a 2-sided market. You had people on either side of the market. You had existing leads, new customers. You would have a conversion rate, and then however many of those customers were activated, there was a transaction rate that was a revenue per month. And then on the bottom was really focused around customer churn. Where did you lose folks? How did you add new ones? Would add new customers. Ultimately, that drove revenue. So in this example here, again, it just strips it down to very simple math. And it's not necessarily that this is your OKR, but it helps you validate your OKR to show the linkages versus the examples we had before, which had very long sentences. It was hard to extract out the math to see the dependencies there. ROIC tree. Are you familiar with that term, Doug? Is this the same as an ROIC? Can you spell that out for us,
Christopher, could
Christopher?
you describe it? I don't know what that means.
Like a ROIC tree, like a return on invested capital tree, right?
Yes.
So
Okay, it is
Mhm.
correct.
Yeah,
sorry.
that's
That's
the
a term
history of
I've never
this.
seen, ROIC, but ROI
think
makes
that-
good sense. Okay.
Yeah, it's like I think like, I guess like they do that like MBA classes and stuff like that.
That's
So,
exactly where
yeah.
this came from. Yeah, and you can trace it all the way back to DuPont. If you do a search on original ones, you can see how they actually had very big printed out posters in their boardroom that showed how the company was making money because they already had multiple divisions. And I think this goes back to the 30s or 40s. I don't have that date correct, but you can really see that you needed to see it at that time. They went to the effort of explaining to others how the company made money. Tying this back to our previous episode or webinar, ideally you could have teams that own specific services that have their own KRs. And that way those durable autonomous teams are just focused on their specific outcomes. And you can see what they really influence and how it drives the bottom line. So whether you draw the tree from the top down as we showed it, or in this example here, you can see the model. And to model this out quickly, we found Excel is the best way to try to model this out. We've not seen other tools that are easier than this, although I will let Doug explain a bit how we use Asana in ours, because that tool has an OKR tool, and it forces you to do the math so that it can measure that are you contributing to the particular key results.
You may hit that now.
Yeah.
Cool. I won't pull it up on
Yeah.
the screen, but Asana is a project management tool. Monday.com is a competitor to it. They're very, very similar. It started out as a task management, became a project management tool. The way we use it, you establish an OKR at the company level. Those company level OKRs have subordinate team levels, which you guys are very familiar with. The key for us is that at a project level, when I've got a department level OKR, I can associate projects with it. For us, for example, if we have an objective to conduct 45 due diligences through the course of any individual given year, let's make it 44 so we can split it by 4 quarters. I will have a quarterly goal that comes in underneath that. I need 11, and the monthly goals that come in under that, where I may have summing up to 11. Each individual goal then is tied to the completion of a project, or in some cases, a specific task. The beauty is that your individuals, the people in your organization that are working on specific things, understand and recognize where their tasks, what I'm working on right now, what goal this is helping us achieve. So it drives understanding and clarity down to an individual level at a point that is new, for me at least, in the last 3 or 4 years. The clarity of understanding what I'm doing right now, my maybe menial task, has meaning because it's helping my company achieve this specific goal at a high level.
And for those of you that have seen the chat, Dave made a good point there that, we're not in the business of building software. We help companies do that.
Amen.
And there's tools, add-ons for Jira and others. The way that Asana is doing it is just tracking tasks, and it's a reminder versus using Excel. We still use Excel also to model and track our OKRs in some cases though. So we're still in that transition of moving from Excel to track OKRs and manually tracking it to a more formal tool such as Asana is a more easier way to track it as a job. Like every month we want to track specific activities to make sure we are improving the key results though. So
the key is to make it transferable, that what you're doing, what an individual is doing on a day-to-day basis, they understand and can see the contribution they're making towards team goals and overall company goals. So they have a good sense of purpose and direction in what they're doing.
All right. So some more examples here of just showing how you might build out a model, whether it's Excel or something else, but just showing the tree view instead of, for example, a funnel view here. So you'll see some of these examples if you download that too. And it makes it easier for people when you look at it this way to work together in an annual or a quarterly planning cycle to look at, are we truly improving the big results that you want? So we're going to close out with a few slides here. Remember, you have to create success metrics that are tied to the business. Don't confuse releases with success. Ultimately measure what drives revenue and what are really the costs to your business, whether it's cost of goods sold, whether it's just your operational costs or high risks scenarios that could have a very bad impact that are harder to model. And make sure you are sharing with your team. When you read some other frameworks, it's very important that you at least quarterly talk about it and celebrate the successes so that it doesn't feel like a slog, and just make it enjoyable, but also take action where you see things are you're not making progress though. So we're gonna cover this is a fairly dense one for reading later, but we see really three common areas where people mess up their OKR implementations here. First of all, just the wrong OKRs. Second is the lack of buy-in, and third is the wrong implementation. So the wrong OKRs, a lot of times we see the confusion between leading and lag indicators. As we mentioned before, the lagging indicators are easier to measure than the leading indicators, and it takes a long time to identify them, and they could change as market conditions change. So you have to be pretty relentless on identifying what those leading indicators are. That's where the experimentation comes in. We also see, go ahead.
We have a question from Reginald. Are we going to discuss tuning the message using this data to help the team align with OKRs and make the metrics meaningful in their day-to-day work?
We're not going to discuss that in too much detail here, although we'll have some examples here. That will be up to you to really make sure it translates down to the day-to-day. So as an example, when we talk about velocity, those are the examples. If I go back here, these examples here may make more sense. These lower level ones should be to the day-to-day work. For example, reducing mean time to detect by 50%, or reducing repeat incidents by 80% relative to last year, or reduce the number of outages that you've caused. So these examples here are the ones that you want to make sure are meaningful to the actual teams though.
And tie it with that arrow up to profitability. Make sure your teams understand what is the profitability goal and what they're doing, how that impacts the profitability. My experience is you'll find people love to work. That's what they're there to do. Give them an understanding of the purpose and the nature of what they're doing, and they will outperform you every single time.
There's two other barriers we see with wrong OKRs, which is it doesn't really reflect the market or your business model that you're in. In a lot of cases, people will miss competitive threats to really show that, hey, we're at risk of this particular competitor coming in, either because they may have features, or they may have a high adoption, or they can deliver just features faster than we can, as an example. Or it doesn't reflect how the business really runs today. Some barriers you may have with the architecture, you may have monoliths that are slowing the company down, or you may have missing people that are really needed to improve the business. So it's ultimately an OKR should reflect and model your business, which is why we showed you the examples of the DuPont diagrams. You're trying to model how your business operates today internally, but also externally. How does it compete in the market? We also see folks mix many common operational activities with WIGs, which are wildly important goals that really drive the business. So wrong OKRs is one of those. Second, just the lack of buy-in. That was an example that I think it was Christopher mentioned earlier, that you don't have the buy-in from the top down. Execs may not understand how OKRs really work. They may have a strategy background or financial background, or they may only have one of those. They also just find that, the lack of buy-in is we just get tired of trying to track those most important metrics, the leading metrics. It may take a while to build in the telemetry, or it may be some investment within certain teams to measure it. And ultimately, it's just patience. We see people get tired after 2 years and not expecting it to be iterative, that it's going to get better each cycle. So you need to be patient and stick with it for multiple years. As new leaders come in, new CEOs, new board members, it can really disrupt this. And so you may not have gotten far enough along, and it leaves a bad taste in folks' minds, and they don't really trust OKRs going forward because they're not able to implement it the right way. And then lastly,
Well,
just go ahead.
time check. We're about 10 minutes.
Yep. Yeah, we're good. We just have one more slide. The wrong implementation. So we talked about how important it is to do the alignment exercise, and that's where it's helpful to get into a tool where you can see all these OKRs and how they relate to one another. One of the disadvantages of some of the more powerful tools are it's hard to zoom in and zoom out to see how they relate. So if you have a more powerful tool to do OKRs, you need to be able to see the big picture and drill all the way down and drill back up. And whether that's Excel or whether it's a tool like Asana or a plugin to Jira, that's where you want to be able to see that and to have that alignment exercise. The alignment should happen at least annually, and if not quarterly. Another common problem we see is tying this to HR concepts like compensation. And the reason that happens is a lot of the compensation tools have OKR modules they've added, but it's not the same concept. And so because they're working with teams, you're tracking goals from the measurement by objective framework, they just have added out OKRs. And if HR is leading this, they may not really understand how OKRs drive the business. So you don't want to truly commingle that too much. You will, granted, have it at the higher levels of the company. The CEO, the COO will be measured on some top level goals, but as it goes further and further down, that's where we see some problems with it. Talked about missing training in OKRs. We just spent an hour on the topic. A lot of times teams need to spend more examples, more time, sometimes 2 hours to understand the concepts. So we just spent an hour describing how OKRs work. It's going to take typically another 1 to 4 hours for each team to model out, build them, and see if they make sense. And then lastly, you need to fit it in with your whatever things you're doing today on a quarterly basis or an annual basis and adjust those versus trying to add yet another process on top of that. So try to incorporate this into existing process today, identify what you need to stop doing with those current processes and the things you need to start doing with your new processes though.
Another question.
Yep.
Is there a point for HR coordination to align our message?
Yeah, HR should be supporting in this case, but they have to really understand the purpose of OKRs. Particularly if they're managing your OKR tool, that's where it's helpful. So they understand and make sure teams are not commingling concepts, with what they're trying to do. You don't necessarily need HR to drive this, but they should be a key supporter of this initiative if you're a large organization. If you're a small organization, everyone is doing HR.
It's important that they understand the business purpose behind this. OKRs are not technical. They're not individual team driven. They are built best from the corporate level down. So an HR group that understands the business purpose behind what you're doing can help you provide communication and adoption all the way through. Christopher,
Go ahead, Christopher. Question.
Yeah, I do. Sorry. I prefer talking than typing. When you this goes to like creating the OKRs and alignment. So like if you're doing annual, say the company leadership does its annual OKRs, right? So that's at the top of the tree. Would you recommend, or is it best practice then to have the subordinate teams do annual OKRs that align with that? And then if you have a quarterly structure, then they're aligning their quarterly OKRs with those annual ones that they created that align with the top ones. And the reason why I ask that question is because like a lot of times with the measurement technique, if they're creating a quarterly one that's aligning with say an annual one, it's kind of like, well, a quarter is not enough time, say, to even, because I think you're referring to the key results as possible lagging indicators, right? We won't really know where we stand by the end of the quarter with some of the key results that we think are going to be the driver for that outcome.
Yeah, you just have to expect that to happen. You want to close that loop between annual planning and quarterly planning and that alignment exercise. And as much as possible, try to identify those indicators as early as possible, just to see, are you on track or not? And when you get good at this, you ultimately get down to the month level of seeing, are we on track? Are we not on track? Are we going to miss it though? So you will definitely need to link those concepts together though. And that's why a lot of folks lose patience in it. You also ultimately need to automate some of your measurements here just so you don't spend a lot of human labor just trying to track down all these measurements.
I have another question if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
So what do you like what do you have any suggestions for working with like your peers or in leadership that maybe aren't as metric driven than you are, right? Because this obviously depends on that. So like some of the practices we've gone through before, and I noticed the struggles are like a lot of times when um they might be going through the exercise, they seem more kind of like glorified tasks, right? As opposed to like a key result. So like are there like I don't know, like because it's like that fine line, right? You're trying to work with them, but you don't want to like good techniques or recommendations for trying to help people be more like I said, like I kind of like that quote that you shared earlier. What if you're not measuring, you're not managing, or something like that. For
Mhm.
however, when I can't remember exactly what it was, but yeah, how do you work with like your peers when like they're not really like you're not kind of in the sense that they're necessarily metric driven, which is sometimes a little bit frustrating.
Well, this is where doing it in some cases in a group exercise is more helpful. It's not so much a peer pressure, but if you can help do it in a room, it's helpful to see. Or you just have a one-on-one with that person. If you're the one trying to drive this behavior, we really like the DuPont diagrams because when you put something on the wall or on a screen, you're talking to a concept and you get more of that effective conflict that we talked about in our previous exercise, where you get them activated and thinking about it, and then ask them what's wrong with this model, how do we make money, or where do you think this is wrong, and get them engaged that way though. Even if they're not metric driven, if you can visualize it as quickly as possible, as easily as possible, you'll tend to unlock that though. So that's why we drew this DuPont diagram here on the bottom left. It's one of the best techniques we found to get engagement is talking to a drawing, something that
Gotcha.
you've done, and have them edit it.
Okay, great, thank you.
OKRs are intended, just like KPIs and management by objective before it, they're intended to influence and change behavior. And it's not just another filter to try and measure what you're doing. The desire is to alter and change what you're doing to orient it in a constructive manner that has very specific purpose, very specific measurable elements that drive specific things for our business. The key results drive towards a specific outcome. So that's one of the elements that I think is necessary as a change factor within the company is that you're really driving a change in behavior.
This slide was put together just to show you some ways to help you build good OKRs or to help understand where some executives may have had a different mindset or framework. And so you might have to learn a little bit about these. For example, the business model canvas, we'll talk about that when we get to the product management courses. Zone to Win, we'll also talk about that at that time. Leaders have gone through in the past, if they've been in the workforce for 30 years or more, they will probably have come across 4DX, 4 disciplines of execution, or North Stars. Very common for the management consulting firms. Generally tend to teach North Stars, which is how you're focused and going to win a market. ADKAR is a change management approach. To build out your operational model of how your business works, capability maps are helpful. And then just for digital delivery, SAFe has a lot of elements there about how to deliver products faster, or just the Scrum Alliance there. All these have, different purposes, and you will have different stakeholders who are familiar with some of these concepts, but not others. So it's somewhat helpful if you can dig a little bit, spend about an hour or two learning about these concepts as well to see where they're coming from to help influence your peers to build out good OKRs. So it just is more of a reference here for you to understand where sales may have come from, your CEO may have come from, the CFO. They may be thinking more in these models here than perhaps in OKRs. And so you may have to create that translation layer for them. So just lastly, this is our last slide. I want to cover through it. Just how does this tie back to product delivery? The idea is that the green is showing hypothesis-driven delivery. OKRs should drive your themes to epics at an annual or quarterly basis. to stories to your build, all the way through automation with CI/CD. You know, as you release, you want to actually have the telemetry built in to measure the outcomes, the actual business metrics to see, do they truly relate to what you're looking for, and then analytics looking to usage. So the red line is to validate your hypothesis at either stage here. So this is just showing how it traces back, and the goal of how you want to tie your delivery process all the way back to OKRs. You typically need the annual and quarterly plan to adjust to market needs. You want to do just delivery, discovery, and just in time, not to waste too much time for engineers. Automate everything you can to improve quality and time to market, and then just measure everything you can just to make sure the product experience is aligned to the market outcomes. All right, we're at the end of our time today. Next Friday, January 17th, is our risk model for availability. It's going to get a little more technical, but it's presented in a way for product managers. So pull in your product managers if you can. It's going to be very simple math to understand. Pull any of your other peers that you want to. The next one after that is going to be a little more technical for anti-patterns and patterns. That's generally going to be more outcomes specific, or very technical, I should say. All right, Doug, let's go ahead and pause the webinar, but we can stay on for those of you that
Yep.
don't have a hard stop, that if we can do a Q&A session for some of you.